My granddaughter called me in the middle of the night. "Grandma, I'm at the police station. My stepfather hit me, but now he says I attacked him. They don't believe me." When I arrived at the police station, the officer at the desk turned pale and stammered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." But before we continue, check if you're subscribed to Elderly Stories and share in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far our revenge stories reach. Around 2 in the morning, my sleep was shattered by the insistent sound of the phone. The sharp ring echoed from the nightstand. I jolted up, reached out and turned on the lamp. The yellowish light lit up the screen and the words I saw froze me inside. "My dear Sarah." A chill ran down my spine. She never calls this late. With trembling hands, I swiped to answer. "Sarah, what's wrong, honey?" I tried to keep my voice calm. On the other end, I didn't hear her usual cheerful voice, but a choked, desperate sob distorted by the echo of a large place, maybe a lobby or a public hallway. "Grandma." Her voice trembled, cut by sobs. I'm at the police station." Every word was like a blow to my head. The police station. Why was she there? "My stepfather. He touched me." Sarah broke down crying, trying to explain between hiccups. "I just defended myself, but now he says I attacked him. They believe him, Grandma. They don't believe me." A mix of rage and fear flooded my body. Edward, that man. I always knew there was something wrong with him. Just then, I heard a rough male voice near her giving orders. "Miss, you can't use the phone. Grandma, save me." Those were the last words I heard before a sharp beep cut off the call. "Sarah, Sarah!" I yelled into the dead phone, but only silence answered me. Without thinking for a second, I jumped out of bed, my hands clumsy, my head spinning. I grabbed the thick coat hanging on the chair and ran to the kitchen. I left the house without even closing the iron gate behind me. The old engine roared with a groan before launching into the icy darkness. The scene at the police station was painfully familiar. I've spent half my life in places like this, but never as the relative of a suspect. The cold neon lights, the smell of old coffee mixed with paper and disinfectant. The officer at the desk was a young guy, his face tired and inexperienced. He looked up and asked mechanically, "How can I help you, ma'am?" I had no time for formalities. I put my hands on the counter, looked him straight in the eye, and spoke with the firmness of someone who knows how to give orders. "I am Teresa Rollins. I'm here to see my granddaughter, Sarah Miller." At that moment, a man in uniform came out from the inner hallway. I recognized him immediately. Inspector Mark Duncan. When I was still on the force, he was just a rookie patrolman who looked at me with a mix of respect and admiration. Seeing me, Mark stopped. His professional expression broke into surprise and then discomfort. "Inspector Teresa, no, I didn't expect to see you here. Is your granddaughter the young woman they just brought in?" I was in no mood for pleasantries. I felt my heart burning. My voice hardened cold and precise, like when I interrogated criminals. "Where is Sarah Duncan?" He hesitated at my tone, swallowed, and pointed toward 2 rooms in front of us. My stomach clenched as I looked. 2 rooms, 2 cruelly opposite scenes. Through the glass of interrogation room, number 1, I saw my angel. Sarah was hunched over in a metal chair, small and lost. Her thin hands were handcuffed to the table. Under the white light, I could see her cheek was swollen red, with a scratch running down to her chin. Her eyes were wide, empty, filled with fear and desperation. Rage and pain rose in my throat, but my gaze shifted to the room next door. There several paramedics surrounded Edward. That bastard. Sitting comfortably, his shoulder bandaged with white gauze, barely a scratch. He was talking non-stop to another officer, his voice fake with pained victimhood playing the part of the concerned father perfectly. I got close enough to hear his words. "The girl hasn't been well lately, officer. It must have been the pressure from her studies. I just tried to go into her room to calm her down. I was afraid she might do something crazy and hurt herself. Who knew the girl would go crazy?" She grabbed something sharp from the table and stabbed me. I stared at the man through the glass. In his eyes there was no fear or pain, nothing like someone who had just been attacked. He was completely calm, calculating, and when he glanced quickly at the room where Sarah was, I saw a disgusting flash of satisfaction in his eyes. For a moment, the grandmother in me stepped aside and made way for the veteran investigator. Every detail, every gesture, every clumsy lie he told screamed at me. The instinct of someone who has spent a lifetime facing crime and deceit screamed one truth. He was lying. The slap mark on Sarah's swollen cheek was like an ink stain spreading, dragging a current of memories I had tried to bury for years. Memories of a family that was once whole, happy. I thought of Lucy, my only daughter, who used to have a smile so bright it could light up the whole room. And I thought of David, her husband, Sarah's father. He wasn't an elegant man. David was a construction worker with hands rough and hardened by cement and steel, but those same hands were incredibly gentle when they held his daughter's tiny hand. I remember perfectly how he'd come home every afternoon, clothes covered in dust, exhausted after a long day of heavy labor, but never without a smile for his wife and daughter. He would lift Sarah into his arms, let her snuggle into his neck, and laugh out loud no matter how much white dust got on her shirt. But one call from the construction site erased all those smiles. A scaffolding accident. Brief, cold, and cruel. David never came home. From that day on, Lucy's house was plunged into a terrifying silence. My daughter, once strong and cheerful, threw herself into work at a marketing firm like a moth to a flame. She left early, came back late. She lost herself in campaigns and numbers, as if trying to escape the pain and emptiness David had left in every corner of the house. Sarah was too young to understand the loss, and slowly she became a shadow in her own home. I went over often. I cooked her favorite meals. I cleaned. I tried to fill that enormous void with my presence, but I knew I could never replace a father figure. 2 years after the tragedy, Lucy brought Edward home to introduce him. He was a financial advisor completely different from David. He wore expensive suits, spoke fluently, and always showed an elegant confidence. At the first dinner at my house, he brought a bottle of fine wine. He kept saying my casserole was better than any restaurant's, and he kindly asked Sarah how she was doing in algebra. He put on a perfect performance. A successful man madly in love with Lucy, who treated her daughter as if she were his own. Lucy, exhausted and craving support after so much suffering, quickly fell into the sweet trap. She looked at him with hope, convinced she had found a lifeline. But I didn't. My elderly intuition, or maybe my police instinct, told me something didn't fit. His smile was beautiful, but it never reached his eyes. In those eyes there was always a coldness and calculation. I noticed that in the moments when he thought no one was watching, his gaze would slide over to Sarah, who was just entering adolescence, and it wasn't the gaze of a stepfather. It was that strange assessing look, like a hunter watching his prey. Once I couldn't hold back anymore. I waited until we were alone and told her calmly, "Lucy, you should find out more about him." Lucy immediately got defensive. She cut me off, her tone hurt and annoyed. "Mom, don't be so judgmental. He's very good to me and Sarah. Don't you want me to be happy?" That question was like a knife to the heart. I fell silent. I was afraid that if I insisted, I would end up pushing my daughter away, and with that, I would lose the chance to protect my granddaughter. My fear was not unfounded. Sarah was 13 then, and every weekend she insisted on having a sleepover at my house. One Saturday night, while we were baking cookies together, and the smell of cinnamon and vanilla filled the kitchen, she suddenly stopped and whispered very softly, "Grandma, I don't like the way my stepfather looks at me." My heart stopped for a second. I knelt beside her, trying to keep my voice calm. "What do you mean, honey?" She looked down at the floor. "When Mom isn't home, he stares at me a lot. One time when I wore the short dress Mom bought me, he looked at my legs and made some really weird jokes. I'm scared." I felt a coldness in my chest. Her small body trembled in my arms. Rage and helplessness rose in my throat. I could only tell her the little I could, that she should always lock her bedroom door, that if anything strange happened, she should call me immediately, and that she should find any excuse to come to my house as often as possible. It's been 5 years since that night, 5 years living with this anxiety, with the guilt of not having done more. I fooled myself into thinking that maybe it was just a teenager's sensitivity, that my fear was exaggerated, that I was seeing ghosts. I prayed I was wrong, but Edward's smug look through the glass brought me back to reality like a stab wound. Cold fury tightened my chest, but years of work had taught me to turn rage into a precise weapon. I took a deep breath, pushed the image of my granddaughter out of my mind, and put on the armor of former Inspector Teresa Rollins. I turned and walked straight to Mark Duncan. My voice no longer had any of the friendly tone of an old acquaintance, only the firmness of a superior interrogating a subordinate. "Inspector," I emphasized his rank. "I demand to speak to my granddaughter alone right now. It's her right and you know it." Mark looked uncomfortable, glancing at the room next door, where a paramedic was attending to Edward. "Mrs. Rollins, protocol." He started to stammer, repeating the same rules I myself had taught him years ago. "I know the protocol better than you do, Duncan," I interrupted, looking at him with cutting coldness. "Do you know who I am? Don't make me remind you. Give me 5 minutes." The weight of my name was still enough. Mark swallowed, nervous. Finally, he nodded with resignation and signaled a young officer to open the interrogation room door. The metal door opened with a squeak, revealing a cold, cruel space. Only the monotonous hum of the fluorescent tube on the ceiling could be heard. Sarah lifted her head when she saw me enter. Her eyes were swollen red, filled with a desperation so deep it broke my soul. "Grandma," she sobbed, barely a broken whisper. When she moved slightly, the handcuffs hit the metal table edge with a sharp, humiliating clang. I turned to the young officer. "Unlock one of her handcuffs," I ordered. He hesitated, looking outside, seeking approval from Mark. I didn't wait. "Did you not hear me? The girl is not a dangerous criminal." He finally obeyed. The click of the lock sounded like a small relief. I sat across from Sarah, took her freezing hand, the marks of the metal still visible. "It's okay, my love. I'm here now," I told her tenderly but firmly. "Now take a deep breath. That's it. Tell me everything. Every detail, don't leave anything out. I need to know everything." Under the cold white light, Sarah began to recount her nightmare. Her voice trembled, sometimes breaking with sobs. Her mom, Lucy, was on a business trip in Chicago. Only the two of them were in the house. That night, around 11, she was getting ready for bed when she heard Edward's car arrive, then the heavy, clumsy footsteps coming up the stairs. He reeked of alcohol. He knocked on her bedroom door. Sarah didn't want to open it, but he pretended to be interested in a university project. The door was just ajar. He pushed his way in, and immediately she heard the sharp click of the lock. "He got close to me," Sarah murmured, her gaze lost somewhere in the void. His voice sounded sickly sweet. "You're so pretty lately, so grown up. I just want to give you a little hug." She backed up until she hit the edge of her desk. "You're drunk, please get out." He didn't listen. He lunged at me and grabbed my arm. I fought back, I screamed, and he slapped me. Her voice broke. It was so loud, so hard. My ear was ringing. He pushed me against the desk chair, and his other hand started touching me. Tears burned my eyes, but I swallowed them. This was not the time for weakness. In the midst of her panic, she continued, "I saw the metal compass I use for technical drawing on the table. I didn't think. I just grabbed it with all my strength and I stuck it in his shoulder." He screamed in pain and staggered back toward the bed. Taking advantage of that moment, Sarah ran out down the hall and, still in shock, dialed 911. After hearing her, I felt my chest tighten until it hurt. I forced myself to stay calm, looked her straight in the eyes, and asked a key question. "Sarah, when he attacked you, was the door open or closed?" She sobbed, trying to remember. When he came in, it was ajar, but then he pushed it and locked it. I heard the lock click." That answer sank my soul. His version said he was outside, hers that he had entered and locked the door, his word against hers. But a spark of hope lit up in my mind, a detail I myself had planned, the security camera. Months ago, I had advised Lucy to install a small camera in the upstairs hallway right in the corner facing Sarah's door to monitor the house when she traveled. That camera. It might have recorded the moment Edward entered the room. I stood up, immediately, touched my granddaughter's shoulder. "Stay here. I'll be right back." I went out and walked straight to Mark, who was still standing there looking annoyed. Duncan, I demand you pull the security camera footage from my daughter's house, right now. Mark frowned, but he couldn't refuse such a reasonable request. He took me to the monitoring room. Edward, already treated by the paramedics, was also called in to compare stories. His face once again showed that disgusting confidence. Mark took longer than usual, with the system muttering something about connection failures. Finally, the video appeared on the screen. The recording began. The image was a bit distorted, showing the empty hallway. The time ran in the corner. Suddenly, the video jumped. In the next scene, Sarah's door burst open. She came out with the bloody compass in her hand and stabbed it into Edward's shoulder, who was curiously right at the threshold, as if he had just arrived. The entire time he entered, locked the door, and whatever happened inside was gone. All that remained was the scene of Sarah attacking him without reason. Edward smiled a nauseating smile of triumph. He turned to the officer beside him, holding out his arms like a martyr. "There's the truth. I just walked up to ask her something, and she attacked me for no reason. See, I told you." I remained silent, but my fists inside my coat clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. A clumsily cut video. An officer with suspicious behavior, a perfect setup to blame the victim. The recording had been manipulated. I didn't suspect it. I knew it. Edward's smile was pure poison, but it was also the light that showed me the way. He and Mark thought that mangled video was the final nail, the irrefutable proof that would bury the truth. But they were wrong. They forgot something. Proof that isn't on a hard drive, that can't be easily manipulated by dirty fingers. It's saved in the emergency center's archives. I turned sharply towards Mark with a look devoid of any compassion. "All right, Duncan. The video might have interference, it might be cut, but the audio doesn't." My voice echoed firmly in the suffocating silence of the room. "I want to hear the 911 call my granddaughter made." Mark's face showed a momentary flash of panic, but he quickly covered it with a false professional look. "Mrs. Rollins, that requires an official order from the DA. Procedure." "Don't talk to me about procedure anymore," I growled, taking a step toward him, forcing him to back up. "You know who I am, Duncan. You know who I have connections with. Don't make me use other methods, the kind that would make you regret coming to work tonight." My direct threat worked. The weight of the shadow of a former high-ranking inspector, his boss's old boss, made him hesitate. He looked at Edward for support, but the other man just looked down, not saying a word. Finally, Mark nodded in annoyance and ordered a technician to pull the recording. The whole room fell silent. Edward crossed his arms, visibly less confident. Sarah, who had been brought out of the interrogation room, stood behind me, trembling. The speaker hissed, and then a calm operator's voice came on. 911, what's your emergency?" And then Sarah's voice, broken, desperate between sobs. "Help! Help me, please! Someone is attacking me at 24 Hidalgo Street." But that wasn't all. The most important part was the background noise, the sounds that no trick could generate in the midst of real panic. Very clearly, Edward's voice could be heard somewhat more distant, growling with rage, like a wounded animal. "What are you doing? Drop that phone right now!" Then came the phrase that condemned him, the girl's cry, covering even her ragged breathing. "No, let go, my mom is coming." And Edward's response, every word spat out between clenched teeth, full of malice and the sick confidence of someone who feels untouchable. "Shut up, you brat. If you talk, your mother will believe you provoked me." "Don't forget, she only believes me." The recording ended. The silence that followed was as heavy as a tombstone. The other officers looked at each other, uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with Mark. His face was as pale as paper, with beads of sweat on his forehead. There it was, the irrefutable proof, the demon's confession. But I underestimated Edward's audacity. He didn't flinch. In seconds, he regained his composure and launched a counteroffensive as cunning as it was disgusting. "That's fake," he shouted, pointing at the speaker. "It's all fake. Do you know, Sarah studies information technology. She's doing a research project on voice AI, audio deepfake. She can create any sound, imitate any voice she wants. She clearly prepared this setup to destroy me." His nerve left me speechless. He turned to Sarah, who remained motionless, her eyes wide with confusion. "Tell them, Sarah, aren't you working on an audio deepfake project? Tell them all." Sarah stammered, desperate, looking from side to side. Yes, I study that technology. It's part of a class, but I swear I would never do something so dirty. Her innocent confession, while partly true, became a weapon in the hands of the guilty. It planted a seed of doubt in the minds of everyone present, a brilliant tech student resentful of her stepfather. That argument sounded reasonable to those looking for an easy way out. Mark seized the opportunity instantly, as if he'd found a life raft. He nodded with a professional air. That's right, this technology is very complex. We cannot consider this valid proof until it undergoes a deep analysis by specialists. This will take a long time. I understood immediately. He was buying time trying to cover for Edward. He was turning the truth into a tangled mess to smother the case. At that moment, the monitoring room door burst open. My daughter Lucy ran in. She looked exhausted, her hair disheveled and her face gaunt with worry after the night flight. She had come straight from the airport. Edward, like a first-class actor, changed his expression immediately. He ran to her, playing the perfect martyr. He hugged her and showed her the bandage on his shoulder. "Look, she stabbed me. I swear I just wanted to go in and see how she was. I didn't think—" His voice broke, leaving the sentence unfinished. Lucy froze. Her eyes went from her fiancé's pained face to her trembling daughter, with her wrists marked by the cuffs, and then to my face, cold as marble. The exhaustion from the trip, the emotional shock, and above all the blind faith she had placed in Edward for so many years combined to give her a cruel conclusion. She looked at me, and in her eyes there was no longer concern but reproach. Then she looked at Sarah with an expression I will never forget, a look of pure disappointment. "Sarah never liked him," Lucy said, her voice trembling but firm. "Mom, what if she really did make it all up to ruin my happiness?" Sarah's choked sob sounded more painful than any scream. She hung her head, her shoulders shaking. Broken, completely broken. A mother's knife hurts more than any police accusation or a culprit's lie. I looked at her and felt infinite sadness and rage. She was a victim too, a victim of deception. In that moment, I understood. In that room, I was alone. And the battle ahead was not just for justice for my granddaughter, but to win back my daughter blinded by a demon. I didn't say anything to Lucy. Any reproach was useless. I just gently took Sarah, already shattered, and led her to the cold bench in the hallway. "Stay here with me. Everything is going to be all right," I whispered, though even I didn't know where to begin. I left her sitting and moved to a corner, my heart heavy as stone. From there, I watched the whole theater. Mark was patting Edward on the back, feigning comfort, but their eyes met with complicity. The other officers, after seeing the family drama and hearing the AI story, began to gather their documents ready to close the case with the simplest version: a rebellious, unstable teenager who attacked her stepfather. They wanted to finish as soon as possible, but among all that indifference, there was someone different. A young officer, thin with a steady gaze, was leaning against the water cooler. Her name tag read, Laura Evans. She wasn't looking at Mark or Edward. Her eyes were fixed on Sarah's huddled figure with a compassion impossible to hide. I remembered she was the one who had shaken her head when Edward spouted that lie about the AI technology. She didn't believe him. In this swamp of falsehood, she was the only light. I knew she was the one I had to find. I walked toward the cooler, slowly pretending I just wanted a glass of water to calm down. As I passed Laura, I didn't stop. I murmured, barely audible, "The Lighthouse Cafe down the street in half an hour. Alone." I didn't wait for her response. I continued to the cooler. I poured water I had no intention of drinking. In the reflection of the glass, I saw Laura startle at the unexpected invitation, but after a second's hesitation, she nodded discreetly. At the Lighthouse Cafe, at that hour before dawn, there were only a few taxi drivers dozing. I chose the most secluded table and ordered a black coffee, no sugar. The bitter taste helped clear my mind. 10 minutes later, Laura arrived. She was still in full uniform, but she had taken off her jacket with the insignia as if to detach herself a bit from her role. She sat across from me, looking worried and tense. I didn't waste time. Time didn't permit it. "You believe my granddaughter, don't you, Officer Evans?" Laura sighed, her restless hands stirring her latte. "Yes, former inspector," she admitted. "My gut tells me the girl isn't lying. The way she was so scared, the way that Edward guy put on a show, it's all too obvious. But in our line of work, gut feelings aren't proof. Everything is against your granddaughter right now." She continued, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Inspector Duncan has preliminarily concluded that the case is due to Sarah having a psychological episode and attacking her stepfather during a loss of control. He's rushing the paperwork to send the file to the DA tomorrow morning. He wants to close the case." "Doesn't that CCTV recording seem strange to you?" I asked, probing deeper. Laura's eyes lit up as if she had been waiting for that question. "Yes, very strange. I've watched it and replayed it in my head. The footage cuts off abnormally right before she runs out. Nothing natural like a clip was clumsily edited. And more importantly, the timestamp on the video has an illogical jump. A few seconds, maybe tens of seconds, are missing." I knew I had found the right person. This woman not only had compassion, she also had the sharp eye of a good investigator. "Can you check the original file of that video?" Laura hesitated. She pressed her lips together. "That's very risky, ma'am. The original evidence file is kept on the central server. Only inspectors and above or the tech department have access. I'd have to do it behind Inspector Duncan's back. If they catch me, I could lose everything." I looked her straight in the eye. "I understand the risk, but if we do nothing, an innocent girl's life will be ruined. Sometimes justice requires us to take unconventional paths, Officer Evans." Laura was silent for a long time. Her gaze was lost in the now cold coffee cup. Finally, she looked up resolute. "All right, I'll try." 2 days later, the 2 longest days of my life, a call came from a payphone. It was Laura. Her voice was tense and rushed. She told me her daring plan. She had claimed her work computer was malfunctioning and couldn't read the case's video file format. That excuse allowed her to get close to the technical forensics department. While a technician helped her fix the machine, she struck up a conversation and asked him to open the original file from Sarah's case to test if her computer could read it. The result confirmed our suspicions. The meticulous technician, unaware of the plot, confirmed that the video file's metadata had been altered. Specifically, a 48-second fragment at the beginning had been crudely cut. And here was the most conclusive proof. The file's editing history was clearly logged undeniably. The account used to make that edit belonged to Inspector Mark Duncan, and the manipulation had been done just minutes before the tape was shown to me. "We have proof he did it, ma'am," Laura concluded over the phone. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, but this is a double-edged sword. If we present it now, he'll deny everything. Say his account was hacked, and I'll be the one fired, maybe even prosecuted for improperly accessing the file. We can't confront him head-on. We need something else, external proof, something completely objective that he can't deny or control. I understood Laura's point. We had proof of the cover-up, but we still needed evidence of the initial crime. Proof that the hands of Mark Duncan and Edward couldn't reach. While Laura had to move cautiously in the darkness of the precinct, I knew I had to start my own battle in the public light. Thanks to my old reputation and a couple of calls to friends who owed me favors, Sarah was released on bail. But it was freedom with chains. She was placed under supervision, forbidden from leaving the city, and required to check in weekly. She moved in with me into my quiet little house, but the tranquility of the house couldn't calm the storm in her heart. Sarah spent all day in silence like a shadow. Her smile was gone, and that clear gaze she used to have was now lost distant. She didn't cry, but her silence hurt more than any scream. I couldn't just stand by and watch my granddaughter fade away. I had to find the proof Laura talked about, external proof and objective truth. I decided to go back to the neighborhood where my daughter lived, the place where the nightmare began. I went door to door, hoping to find a witness, a security camera, anything. But the search quickly turned into a bitter disappointment. The first door was opened by a middle-aged man. He just shook his head and said he hadn't seen or heard anything. Then he closed it quickly. At the second house, a young woman, as soon as she heard the words, "police," and Edward slammed the door in my face as if I were a disease. Some people were kind, offering me a glass of water. They listened to my story with pity in their eyes, but when I asked if they'd be willing to testify, they all refused. They were afraid of Edward, afraid of the trouble he could cause. They chose the safety of silence. As the sun began to set in the west, painting the roofs red, I was about to give up. I stood in front of the last house directly across from Lucy's, my heart full of helplessness. I took a deep breath and rang the bell. The person who opened it was an older woman, her hair completely white and neatly tied back, a kind face with sweet wrinkles around her eyes. Mrs. Peterson. I remembered seeing her a few times when I visited my daughter. She recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Rollins, please come in. You look so tired." She ushered me into her warm living room and made me a cup of chamomile tea that smelled delicious. Without me saying anything, she spoke first, her voice full of compassion. "I heard what happened with little Sarah. It's terrible. I'm very fond of her. She's a good girl. And to be honest, I never liked that Edward fellow. He seems as slippery as an eel." Her words were like warm water on my frozen heart. I told her the whole situation, hiding nothing, and asked if she had any cameras or had seen anything strange the night of the incident. Mrs. Peterson shook her head sadly. "Oh, what a shame. My house camera broke last week, and my husband still hasn't called the technician." I felt my spirits plummet. The last hope was fading. I took a sip of tea, but the bitterness inside me was much stronger. Then Mrs. Peterson narrowed her eyes, as if trying to remember something. "Oh, wait." She lightly tapped her forehead. "It wasn't that night. It was a few days before. Last week, my husband and I were arguing about the new roof. He wanted red shingles, and I preferred gray, like the ones on Lucy's house. To prove my point, I recorded a short video of her roof with my cell phone to show him. I remember it was a weekday, and only Edward and Sarah were there. Do you want to see it? It probably won't help much, but..." And a spark of hope, however small. It was worth a shot. "Yes, please. May I see it?" Mrs. Peterson fumbled in her purse, took out her phone, and after a few seconds passed it to me. "Here it is." The video started. The image trembled with an unsteady hand. At first, it only showed a piece of blue sky and the gray shingles in the foreground. I almost sighed with disappointment. Just as she said, it didn't seem useful. But then, as the camera panned down a bit to show the whole roof, something was reflected in the second-floor window of Lucy's house, the window of Sarah's room. My heart started to pound. The image wasn't clear. It was distorted by the reflection, but you could make it out. Sarah was on the small balcony outside her room, watering the bougainvillea she loved so much. And then Edward came out of the room. In the reflection, I saw him stand behind her, too close, invading her space. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear. His hand didn't rest on her shoulder in an affectionate, fatherly way. It slid slowly down her arm, a gesture loaded with possession and malice. And then I clearly saw Sarah's reaction through the glass. She froze. Her shoulders tensed defensively. She tried to pull away, but Edward's hand gripped her arm tightly. The girl's entire body, even as a blurry, reflected image, screamed fear and silent resistance. My hand was shaking, holding the phone. This was it. This was the proof Laura said we needed. Completely accidental, totally objective, and irreversible proof. It didn't show the attack in the room that night, but it completely destroyed the image of the exemplary stepfather Edward had worked so hard to build. It demonstrated his predatory behavior. It proved Sarah's fear was real. I looked up at Mrs. Peterson, and the tears I had held back for days suddenly burst out unstoppable. "Ma'am," my voice broke, "you just saved my granddaughter." Leaving Mrs. S. Peterson's house, I felt re-energized. The video on her phone wasn't just proof it was a weapon, the sword we needed to cut through this web of lies. I immediately went to a nearby payphone and called Laura. I didn't dare use my own phone just in case. "I have it," I said as soon as Laura answered, my voice trembling with emotion. "A video. Not directly, but enough to prove he's a predator." There was a second of silence on the other end. I heard Laura's relieved sigh. "Don't send it over the internet, please. Don't tell anyone else. We need to meet." We couldn't meet at the city police station. That place was a trap now. A cafe wasn't safe either. In the end, we decided to meet at a neutral, safer place. The office of a lawyer I trusted completely, an old friend named Richard Vaughn. Richard wasn't just a good lawyer. He was a man of integrity, the kind I knew would never turn his back on justice. I called him, and without hesitation, he agreed to help us pro bono. In Richard's office, under a warm light and surrounded by piles of legal files, we laid out all our cards. Laura, dressed in plain clothes so as not to be recognized, clearly and professionally explained her findings, how the CCTV had been edited, how the metadata was altered, and most importantly, that the author was Inspector Mark Duncan. Then it was my turn. I handed Richard Mrs. Peterson's phone. He took it, put on his glasses, and watched the video. He didn't just watch it once. He replayed the blurry, reflected image in that window over and over, dozens of times. The more he watched, the more his face hardened. His usual kindness was gone, replaced by the seriousness of a lawyer facing a grave case. Finally, he put the phone on the table. "This is enough," he said firmly. "We have what we need." Richard explained the next strategy. If we presented this evidence at the city police station, it would most likely mysteriously disappear or be indefinitely delayed by red tape. Mark Duncan and whoever was protecting him would do everything possible to bury it. He proposed a bolder plan, a direct blow to the heart of the system. "We're going to escalate. We are going directly to the state attorney's office to speak face-to-face with the Attorney General Elizabeth Reed." She was known for being tough as steel, a woman who tolerated no form of corruption in the sector. She despised those who tainted the work of others. It turned out Richard had worked with Ms. Reed before and knew her character well. He used his contacts to get an urgent appointment for the next morning. The next day we went to the imposing Attorney General's building together. Me, Laura, and Richard. Mrs. Peterson, after Richard convinced her of the importance of her testimony and assured her of full protection, also found the courage to accompany us as a witness. She told me, "I'm doing this for Sarah and for all the other children." Attorney General Elizabeth Reed was a powerful woman with a sharp gaze and a presence that commanded respect. She wasted no time on unnecessary greetings. She reviewed all the evidence we brought. She listened silently to Laura's detailed testimony about how she discovered the video had been edited. She watched Mrs. Peterson's recording several times, not missing a single detail. When we finished, she only said, "Wait here." 15 minutes later, she returned and gave a series of firm orders. Seal all files on Sarah's case at the city police department. Open an urgent internal investigation against Inspector Mark Duncan for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. That same afternoon, a special team from the AG's office stormed the city police station, causing a huge uproar. It all happened so fast, so suddenly, that no one had time to react. Mark Duncan was immediately called in for questioning without even understanding what was happening. When the AG's technical team presented the irrefutable proof that his account had been used to cut the security video with the exact time and IP address, Mark fell silent, sweat pouring down his forehead. He tried to blame a system error. Then he said someone hacked his account. But the AG's forensic experts debunked those lies in seconds. In the end, facing charges of obstruction of justice and complicity in an assault with a prison sentence looming. Mark broke down. He confessed everything. Based on his statement and by direct order of Ms. Reed, Edward was arrested in his elegant financial advisory office. This time there was no arrogance, no victim act. When the agents put the handcuffs on him in front of his employees, he completely lost control. He screamed beside himself, "This is all a misunderstanding. You're going to destroy my life because of an insolent brat. You're all going to pay for this." During the subsequent interrogation at the AG's office, knowing Mark had been caught and had told all, Edward changed his strategy. He admitted he had asked Mark for help, saying he was an old drinking buddy who owed him a favor. He tried to pin most of the blame on him, hoping it would reduce his sentence. But it was too late. With Mrs. Peterson's video proving the harassment and the 911 call authenticated by audio experts, his guilt was undeniable. No one believed another word from that demon in a man's suit. His performance was over. On the day of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick and tense. It was packed from curious journalists to citizens who wanted to see justice. I sat in the front row next to Sarah. She squeezed my hand tightly. Her fingers were cold and trembling, but when I looked at her, I saw there was no longer fear in her eyes, but determination and a quiet courage. In the back rows, I saw Lucy sitting alone, huddled in a corner. Her face was pale gaunt, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights, and the guilt consuming her. The side door of the courtroom opened. Edward entered, escorted by 2 guards. He was thinner and paler, but he still had that defiant stubbornness in his eyes that had defined him to the end. Then came Mark Duncan, in wrinkled civilian clothes, looking like a faded shadow of his former self. He didn't dare lift his head, just stared at the floor, as if looking for a hole to crawl into. The prosecution, led by Attorney General Elizabeth Reed herself, presented a solid and irrefutable case. She didn't use flowery words. She simply placed the truth on the scales of justice. First, Mrs. Peterson's video was projected onto the big screen. Although the image was a bit blurry, Edward's actions were undeniable. The entire courtroom fell silent, watching him stand behind Sarah, his hand sliding down her arm, and her fearful reaction. The facade of the exemplary stepfather crumbled with the first piece of evidence. Next, the 911 call recording was played. Sarah's voice, filled with panic and desperation, echoed through the room, but it was Edward's phrase. "Shut up, you brat. If you talk, your mother will think you provoked me. Don't forget, she only trusts me." That sent a shiver through everyone present. A murmur of outrage swept the room, and the judge had to bang his gavel for order. Finally, the final blow. A technical expert from the AG's office presented the original recording from the security cameras, fully restored. Everyone held their breath during the 48 seconds of silence that had previously been cut. The video showed Edward checking the hallway before slipping into Sarah's room and closing the door. 48 seconds passed in silence. 48 seconds in which no one knew what horror occurred behind that door. And then the door burst open, and Sarah ran out terrified, defending herself. Those 48 seconds were the deadly void, the most damning proof of Sarah's truth and Edward's lie. During questioning, Edward continued to deny everything. He repeated over and over that it was just an exaggerated show of affection from a concerned stepfather, that Sarah had misinterpreted his intentions. He acted as if he were the victim of a tragedy, but no one believed him. Mark Duncan, however, when called, confessed to all his actions, begging for leniency. His voice was weak, without the slightest trace of the formerly proud inspector. He admitted to manipulating the recording and directing the investigation to favor Edward. When the trial was about to end, the judge asked if I wanted to speak as the victim's guardian. I stood up. I didn't look at Edward, because to me, he was nothing more than a demon unworthy of my attention. My gaze turned to Mark Duncan. "I know you, Duncan," I said, my voice firm in the silence. "I remember when you joined the force, a young man full of ideals. You swore to protect justice and defend the innocent, but what did you do? You turned justice into a bargaining chip to pay back favors. You turned your oath into a cheap joke. Your crime isn't just tampering with evidence. Your greatest crime is betraying the public's trust in the uniform you wear. That is unforgivable." Mark hung his head, his shoulders shaking. He didn't dare look at me. The jury didn't take long to deliberate. The verdict was delivered quickly and without doubt. Edward was found guilty of sexual assault of a minor and other related charges, receiving a sentence of 12 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Mark Duncan was convicted of obstruction of justice and abuse of power with a sentence of 3 years in prison. He was immediately expelled from the force and lost all his titles and his pension for life. When the sound of the judge's gavel marked the end of the trial, I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. Sarah let out a long sigh, as if she had been holding her breath the entire time. As people dispersed, Lucy approached us. She looked lost, soulless. She didn't dare look at Sarah. She just looked at me and broke down, crying tears of late repentance. "Mom, I was wrong," she said between sobs. "I'm a terrible mother. I didn't believe her. I don't deserve to be Sarah's mother." I put my hand on her shoulder. The anger in me had already faded. Only exhaustion and a deep sadness remained. "Yes, you were wrong, Lucy. It was a terrible mistake, but this isn't the time to drown in guilt. Fix your mistake. Don't ask me for forgiveness, act. And the person who needs an apology, the one you must spend the rest of your life proving you've changed for, is not me." I nodded gently toward Sarah. My granddaughter was still there, quiet, looking at her mother for the first time, after avoiding her gaze for so long. There was something complex in her look, a mix of deep pain that hadn't yet healed and a very faint spark of hope, a silent question of whether her mother had truly changed. I knew the healing journey for both of them would be long and full of obstacles. The trial was over. Justice was served. But Sarah's real battle was just beginning. The sentences handed down could not erase the scars etched on her soul. I took her to my house, a little house with a flowering bougainvillea on the porch, her favorite spot. I hoped this place would become her refuge, a fortress of peace to protect her from the world. Days later, Lucy called me, her voice trembling. She wanted to go clean Sarah's room in the old house and bring her things. I spoke to her calmly, asking her to let Sarah decide. "Ask her first, Lucy. Don't make any more decisions for her." In the end, Sarah only asked me to bring some clothes and a few school books she had left behind. She didn't want to go back to that house, not even for a minute. Nor did she want anything from that room where every object was saturated with painful memories. The following days, Sarah didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't complain, but her pain was felt in every gesture, in every silence. She would jump at the doorbell or at the simple sound of my footsteps, a little too loud in the hallway. She didn't sleep well either. Some nights I would hear her murmur tossing in her dreams, and I would get up quietly to sit by her side until her breathing became calm again. One day, she told me she had dropped all her classes in graphic design and AI programming. The metal compass, the same one she had used to defend herself from that monster, had become a nightmare, a living reminder of the horror she had experienced. The body's wounds can heal, but the soul's wounds continue to bleed for a long time. Meanwhile, Lucy awkwardly tried to mend the broken relationship. The first week, she brought an expensive latest generation laptop, saying it was to make it up to her daughter. Sarah just said, "Thanks, Mom," and left the box in a corner. It stayed there, covered in dust, never opened. The following week, she prepared a dinner full of Sarah's favorite dishes. She sat down, ate a few bites out of obligation, but I could see the effort it took her to swallow. The meal passed in suffocating silence, with the metallic clinking of silverware as the only sound. In the end, Sarah asked to be excused to her room, leaving Lucy alone at the cold table. Lucy's visits repeated with the same sad script. She would stand in the living room trying to talk about trivial things. The weather, my health. Sarah, sitting on the porch swing, would stare at the bougainvillea flowers, answering barely in monosyllables. Every time Lucy left, I saw her eyes swollen from holding back tears. One night after another frustrated visit, I didn't let her leave. I sat her down with me on the patio bench. "Do you know why Sarah is so distant with you?" I asked. Lucy finally broke down crying with all her accumulated grief. "Because I didn't believe her. Because I let her suffer." "Yes, but it's not just that," I continued, no longer angry, just tired. "It's because you're trying to buy her forgiveness, with things, with meals, with empty words. But trust isn't bought, Lucy. It's rebuilt little by little, with actions, with infinite patience, and with proof that you have truly changed from the inside." I told her about the night Sarah had nightmares about how she's startled at noises. Her wounds aren't on her skin where you can put ointment. They are inside, in her mind, in her dreams. You have to learn to listen to her silence before you can expect her to talk. My words seemed to awaken something in Lucy. She stopped bringing gifts. The visits became less frequent, more sincere, without pressure, without forcing anything. A month later, she called me to say she had sold the old house. "I can't live with those memories anymore, Mom. Every corner reminds me of how blind I was." And then she began to approach things differently. Instead of coming to visit, she started writing handwritten letters to Sarah. They were short letters with no empty apologies. Instead, she wrote about what she was doing. She wrote that she had found and joined a support group for families of abuse victims. She talked about the painful stories she heard from other mothers, women who had also made mistakes like her. She talked about how she was learning to listen, to recognize the signs, however minimal. She never asked Sarah to write back. She would just come by quietly, leave the letters in my mailbox, and go. One afternoon, I saw Sarah go cautiously to the mailbox, take the pile of letters, and lock herself in her room. That night, for the first time in many weeks, I heard her cry. But it wasn't the desperate cry of her nightmares. It was a contained, cleansing cry, as if the ice in her heart was finally beginning to melt. 6 months passed without hurry, without pause, like a calm river reshaping the banks that had been broken. The ice in Sarah's heart began to melt thanks to her mother's letters. The silence in my house was gradually filled with small conversations, soft music, and sometimes a smile. It wasn't yet the radiant, free smile of the girl she had been. It was still shy with a hint of sadness. But to me, it was worth more than anything. One late spring morning, as I was drinking tea on the porch and reading the newspaper, a large headline on the front page caught my eye, and I almost dropped my cup. Police announce the Teresa Protocol, new operating procedure following case that shocked the nation. My name, printed in large letters in the paper. I kept reading, my heart racing. The article quoted the words of Attorney General Elizabeth Reed. The case of Sarah Miller showed us the fatal gaps in the system where negligence and abuse of power can destroy justice. This new protocol is named after former Inspector Teresa Rollins, a legend of the force who showed us that justice must be pursued to the end, even if it means confronting our own. I carefully read the points of the new protocol. They weren't just empty, pretty phrases. They were real changes born from the hell we had lived through. All CCTV recordings and original audio from a scene must be automatically copied to an independent cloud server at the state's attorney's office as soon as they are registered, without any single person being able to modify or delete them. The victim or their legal representative has the right to request a third-party analysis of digital evidence. And most importantly, all complaints of police misconduct during an investigation will be handled by an independent unit from the AG's office, not by the police's own internal affairs division investigating themselves. Tears ran slowly down my cheeks. They weren't tears of pride, but of relief. Our fight not only brought justice for Sarah, it also left a legacy, a shield to protect other victims in the future. Shortly after, Laura Evans called me. Her voice was full of enthusiasm. She joyfully told me she had been promoted to lieutenant and would now lead a new specialized team for sensitive cases involving women and children. I learned from you that sometimes the uniform only makes sense when we dare to side with the most vulnerable, ma'am, she told me sincerely. Thank you for teaching me that. New seeds of life were sprouting from the ashes of the system. Lucy was now a key volunteer at the victim support center she had once attended. She no longer just answered calls. She also dared to give talks sharing her own story of error. She helped other parents recognize the signs, however small, when their children were being abused, and taught them the hard lesson she had to pay to learn, the lesson about blind trust. And Sarah, my dear granddaughter, she had received her acceptance letter to the State University Law School. One night she sat next to me and said firmly, "Grandma, I want to be a prosecutor, like Ms. Elizabeth Reed. I want to use the law to protect people who can't raise their own voice." On Sarah's first day of classes, Lucy showed up. She didn't come alone. In her hands she held a small pot with a little bougainvillea, its pink and purple flowers just beginning to open. "I know you don't want to go back to the old house," Lucy said, her voice trembling with emotion and fear. "But this bougainvillea, your father David and I planted it a long time ago. I took a cutting. I want you to take a beautiful part of his memory with you on this new path." Sarah was silent. She stared at the pot and then looked up at her mother. There was still pain in her eyes, but the wall of ice seemed to have melted. For the first time in 6 months, she took a step forward and hugged her mother. It was a brief hug, still somewhat awkward and distant, but it was enough to break the silence and the void that had separated mother and daughter for half a year. I watched the scene from afar, my heart relieved. The wound was still there deep, and perhaps it would never fully heal. But a new life was beginning to sprout. That afternoon, after coming back from the university, Sarah and I sat on the porch again as usual. She was focused reading a thick law book. Suddenly she lifted her head, looked at me, and smiled. This time it was a real, complete, radiant smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "Grandma," she said clearly, "thank you for everything." I didn't say anything, just squeezed her hand, a hand that no longer trembled. Outside, the bougainvillea on the roof was blooming bright under the warm afternoon sun. The battle was over, and a new stage, a new chapter of life was about to begin. The story you just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace, or would you have the courage to face it all and reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can be a candle that lights the way for someone else. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the end screen, I'll leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I think they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.